Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Texas Book Festival. We are glad to have y'all with us, and we're especially glad to have our authors with us today. Our authors today are Paul Tough, author of How Children Succeed, Meira Levinson, author of No Citizen Left Behind, and Michael Brick, author of Saving the School. And there are some distinct Austin and Texas connections here. My name is Mark Strama. I'm a state representative from Austin and a member of the Public Education Committee in the Texas House. And I want to start this discussion just briefly with a little bit of educational context about this state's challenges. I got a press release from the Texas Education Agency a couple of months ago that said that on the fourth grade science NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, Texas African American students performed fourth best of all African American students in the country, comparing ours to every other African American cohort in every other state in the country. Our Hispanic students were the sixth best on the fourth grade science NAEP. Our Anglo students were the eighth best of all the Anglo students in the country. And I thought, that's a pretty impressive record. It's a little different than what I expected, actually. So I went to the NAEP website and found that in the aggregate, the Texas student scores on the fourth grade science NAEP ranked 29th in the country. That's not so great. Now, how is it possible that when you disaggregate those three student cohorts and evaluate them against the rest of the country, each of the three cohorts is in the top 10%, top 10 in the country. And we all know that those three cohorts comprise over 95% of the student population. How is it possible that collectively they're 29th? The answer, it turns out, and it wasn't easy to figure this out, the answer is that African American and Hispanic students in Texas and in the country significantly underperform Anglo students. And in Texas, African American and Anglo students make up a significant larger share of the entire student population. So when your lower performing categories of students are a larger percentage of your total student population, you can have all three student groups in the top 10 in the country and still be 29th in the country when you combine them. It begs the question, are our public schools doing a good job, or are they mediocre? And I think if the question is, how are they doing with a student population relative to where they started, we're doing a better job moving them up a steep mountain. But because of the demographics of our student population, our mountain is steeper than all the other states. And if you measure us not based on how are our black students doing compared to other black students, but rather what is the output of the education system, well, there we're 29th. And if the purpose of the education system is to produce a citizenry capable of sustaining democracy and a workforce capable of sustaining prosperity, we're not getting the job done by that measure. With that as context, this state has a lot to learn from these three books. And what I'll do is ask Paul Tough to start with his book, How Children Succeed.
Sure. Thank you very much, Representative Strama. Thanks to all of you for being here. I'm just going to talk for a couple of minutes about my book, How Children Succeed, to give you a little bit of background on it. How Children Succeed is in some ways an argument against the conventional wisdom that the one quality in a child's life that makes the most difference in terms of how well they do is their IQ. And I'm writing about a group of educators and scientists who are taking on that idea and arguing for a different set of skills, things like grit and curiosity, perseverance, conscientiousness, optimism, that they say are better predictors of how well children do in the long term. Part of the book is about neuroscience, is about how the underpinnings of these skills are formed in the environments in which children, babies, grow up. So I spend a lot of time reporting with a pediatrician in San Francisco who's watching how that happens and trying to improve environments for kids. But then a lot of the book also takes place in schools, dealing with adolescents, when those qualities become what we call character. And in different ways, different educators, from a chess teacher in Brooklyn to a private school principal in New York City to mentors working in the highest poverty neighborhood in Chicago, are trying to give students the sort of support and help that they need to do better in this realm. Mostly we don't quite know yet how to teach these strengths, how to help kids improve. But what I read about in this book is some experiments, some new innovative ideas that might be able to help kids do better in this dimension, and in the process help them do better in high school, in college, and in life.
I'm going to follow up each author's introduction of their book with one quick question, and then we'll get to the next author. You wrote a book a few years ago while you were reporting for the New York Times on the Harlem Children's Zone. You turned that into a book called Whatever It Takes. A lot of people in Austin took note of that work, and we very aggressively pursued a Promised Neighborhoods grant from the federal government to try to replicate the model of the Harlem Children's Zone here. Yesterday, you and I were at KIPP, and one of the KIPP students read you a paragraph you had written 3 or 4 years ago, and your response was, a lot of this book is my repudiation of what I wrote then. Tell me, I read this book as sort of a validation of the science behind why the wraparound cradle to college model makes sense in the Harlem Children's Zone. But what about this book? Is this book a confirmation of the Harlem Children's Zone strategy, or is this a deviation from what you thought then?
I hope that I didn't say it was a repudiation. I think what I was trying to say to that student, she was talking about this one particular line that I'd had in an article back in 2006 where I talked about middle-class values as being an important part of what education imparts. And so I think a lot of this book is trying to look more deeply at that question of values, to look at the skills that I think are a more important part of what successful schools are teaching. In terms of how this relates to my reporting in Whatever It Takes, a little of both. So in many ways, I think that it's an affirmation of those ideas. I do think that the best way that I know of to deliver services to high poverty neighborhoods is to do them comprehensively. That simply working in a school alone in a high poverty neighborhood isn't enough. That school needs to be surrounded by early childhood programs, parenting support, after-school programs, help with college admissions, all the things that the Harlem Children's Zone tries to provide in the 97 block neighborhood in Harlem where they work. I think that model could work in Austin or anywhere else, and the Promised Neighborhoods program, the federal government's Promised Neighborhoods program, while it's still a little too small for my liking, I think is a good start to try to spur a lot of different communities into replicating that model. The one way I think that it is that this book does cast doubt on some of the Harlem Children's Zone model is that Jeff Free Canada, in my book, in the chapters of my first book that are focused on the charter schools that he runs, was very focused on standardized test results. As a journalist, that was really a handy device, because when each year is focused entirely on how the kids do on the standardized test at the end of the year, it's a great narrative device. It's very exciting. There's an end to the chapter when those test scores come out, and I think there are lots of principals and teachers and legislators who feel that way as well. But a lot of the research that I read to go into this book really challenges this idea that standardized tests are measuring the skills that matter most for a child's long-term success. So I've come to be more of a doubter of the kind of particular educational focus that Jeff is using or was using in his charter schools, while I actually now believe more in the infrastructure that he has built around his schools to support them.
Meira Levinson is not just a faculty member at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She is a graduate of Austin High School here in Austin, Texas. And I'll let her speak for a few minutes about No Citizen Left Behind.
Great, thank you, Mark. So in a way, I want to pick up on the dilemma that you posed at the very beginning with how to interpret Texas's NAEP scores, and this question of should we look at the aggregate, where Texas is mediocre, basically dead middle, or should we look at the subgroups, where Texas is actually outperforming 80% of the other states in the country for every subgroup? And